In the hours after Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 disappeared on March 8, 2014, a woman in Beijing named Cheng Liping picked up her phone and dialed her husband's number. He'd been in Malaysia for a film shoot and was supposed to be landing in Beijing that morning. The phone rang. Never once going to voicemail, it just kept ringing. Cheng wasn't alone. 19 families signed a joint statement. Their loved ones' phones kept ringing, sometimes for days. The families begged them. These signals are still active. Triangulate the phones. Find our loved ones before the batteries die. Some families even checked QQ, China's biggest messaging platform, and saw passengers' accounts still showing as online. Telecom engineers have spent a decade explaining that a ringing tone can be generated by the network itself while it searches for a device. But if it was that simple, why didn't anyone just tell the families? And not one official, not from the airline, not from Malaysia, not from China, ever gave them an answer. That silence wasn't about telecom. That was a choice. And it was the first of many. Because around the same time those families were calling numbers that would never be answered, a controller in Kuala Lumpur was being told something that would define the next 12 years of this investigation. At 2:03 a.m. on March 8th, Malaysia Airlines reported to air traffic control that MH370 was in Cambodian airspace. The plane wasn't in Cambodia. It was never anywhere near Cambodia. MH370 was actually over the Strait of Malacca, flying in the opposite direction, tracked on military radar that Malaysia had been watching since 1:30 that morning and wouldn't share with the world for another 3 days. One set of phones ringing in Beijing, one lie transmitted from Kuala Lumpur. That's the night MH370 disappeared, and it's the night a 12-year silence began. This video is different from the 3 we've made before on this channel. We've covered the pilot, the search, the investigation. But what we haven't done, what nobody has done properly, is lay out the full pattern of what Malaysia knew, when they knew it, and what they chose to hide. Everything in this video is sourced from official reports, leaked documents, air traffic control transcripts, court records, and direct statements from a former Prime Minister of Australia. There are 2 silences in the story of MH370. The first one is famous. After the plane dropped off radar 40 minutes into a routine flight from Kuala Lumpur to Beijing, it flew for 7 more hours based on satellite data that investigators would later piece together deep into the southern Indian Ocean without making a single communication. 7 hours of a commercial airliner drifting across one of the emptiest stretches of water on Earth while the people on the ground didn't even know which direction to look. That silence ended around 8:19 in the morning local time, when the fuel ran out and the aircraft went into the sea. The second silence is the one that matters more, and it's the one still going 12 years later. Because from the very first hour after MH370 disappeared, the Malaysian government knew things they didn't share. They tracked the plane on military radar heading west while they sent search teams east. They told Vietnamese air traffic control the plane was in Cambodian airspace when it wasn't even close. They waited days to reveal data that could have changed the entire search. And when the FBI pulled critical evidence off the captain's home flight simulator, Malaysia called it routine, then quietly excluded the most important pages from their own investigation report. This video is about that second silence. Not the mystery of what happened in the cockpit, the mystery of what happened on the ground, and why, 12 years later, the people who should be giving answers are still the ones blocking them. If you're interested in discussing MH370 daily and exploring everything related to the mystery, feel free to join our newly created Discord server. And now, back to the video. There were 239 passengers on board. 2/3 of them Chinese nationals. Every single one of them has a family somewhere that woke up on March 8, 2014 and entered a nightmare that hasn't ended. And for most of those families, the legal system has been almost as cruel as the disappearance itself. In 2016, families of 75 Chinese passengers filed lawsuits against Malaysia Airlines in Beijing's Chaoyang District People's Court. Think about that timeline for a second. The plane disappears in March 2014. It takes until 2016 just to file the cases, and then the court takes 9 more years to issue its first ruling. On December 8, 2025, the verdict finally came down, but not for everyone. Of those 75 families, 47 had already settled out of court and withdrawn their lawsuits before the ruling ever came. They took what they could get and walked away. Another 23 cases are still pending, from families who haven't been able to complete the legal process of having their relatives declared dead, because doing so means accepting, on paper, that the person you love is gone. That left 8 families who held on for 9 years. Malaysia Airlines was ordered to pay each of them 2.9 million yuan, roughly $410,000, covering death compensation, funeral expenses, and what the court called mental anguish damages. And the worst part is that the families didn't just face legal delays and bureaucratic slowness, they faced active obstruction. But the obstruction wasn't just legal, it was physical too. In 2016, Blaine Gibson, an independent debris hunter who'd been searching beaches across the western Indian Ocean on his own time and his own money, found what appeared to be wreckage from MH370 on the coast of Madagascar. Proper procedure would be to ship the pieces to Malaysia for forensic examination. Gibson tried to do exactly that, and Malaysia refused to pay the shipping costs. Let that sink in for a second. A man finds physical evidence from the most expensive missing aircraft investigation in aviation history. He contacts the government that's supposed to be leading that investigation, and they won't cover the cargo fee to examine it. More than 40 pieces of suspected MH370 debris have been found scattered across beaches from Reunion Island to South Africa over the past 11 years. Some were discovered by organized search teams. Others were literally picked up by tourists on holiday. 3 were formally verified by investigators as coming from the aircraft. But a lot of people aren't buying it. The debris washed up thousands of kilometers from where the plane supposedly went down, on the wrong side of the Indian Ocean. And the verification process, Malaysia never made it transparent enough for anyone to fully trust it. But here's the thing, the silence didn't start with shipping fees and court delays. It started on the night the plane disappeared. At 1:19 a.m. local time, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah makes his final radio call, a routine handoff to Ho Chi Minh Control by saying, "Good night, Malaysian 370. Less than 2 minutes later, the transponder shuts off, and MH370 vanishes from civilian radar. What happens next is a chain of failures. Ho Chi Minh expects MH370 to check in. Kuala Lumpur assumes it already has. Neither side checks with the other. For 17 minutes, a Boeing 777 is flying over the South China Sea with nobody watching it. But here's the part that matters for this video. While civilian controllers are fumbling the handoff, Malaysian military radar is tracking the aircraft in real time. They can see it making a hard left turn at waypoint Igari, heading back across the Malay Peninsula in the opposite direction of Beijing. An unidentified aircraft, no transponder, no radio contact, crossing their sovereign airspace in the middle of the night. They log it, and they do nothing. No fighters scrambled, no alert to anyone. Their explanation later? They assumed it was a friendly aircraft. Friendly aircraft don't switch off their transponder and reverse course over your country at 1:30 in the morning without telling a single soul. By 1:38 a.m., Ho Chi Minh finally calls Kuala Lumpur. Both centers slowly realize they've lost the plane, and still, nobody activates search and rescue. And then, at 2:03 a.m., Malaysia Airlines makes a statement to Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control that crosses the line from incompetence into something harder to explain. They report that MH370 is in Cambodian airspace. Kuala Lumpur passes this information to Ho Chi Minh. Vietnamese controllers contact Cambodia to confirm. Cambodia has no record of the flight. MH370 was never routed through Cambodia. It was never even close to Cambodian airspace. The statement is entirely, verifiably false. So where did Malaysia Airlines get this? From their own flight projection system, an automated estimate of where the plane should be if it were flying normally. They took a computer projection and reported it as fact, and it sent everyone chasing a ghost in the wrong country, while the actual aircraft was over the Strait of Malacca, heading northwest. At 3:30 a.m., over 2 hours after the plane vanished, Malaysia Airlines finally sends an update admitting the earlier position data was based on flight projection and not reliable for aircraft positioning. 2 hours of controllers, search coordinators, and Vietnamese authorities operating on false information because an airline reported a computer guess as if it were a radar contact. Now, at 5:20 a.m., something happens that should have changed everything. An unnamed Malaysian official contacts Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control and makes a statement that barely gets discussed in the mainstream MH370 narrative. The official says, MH370 never left Malaysian airspace. 4 hours after the disappearance, someone inside the Malaysian system already knows, or at minimum strongly suspects, that the plane turned back. That it never entered Vietnamese airspace, that the Cambodia claim was nonsense, that the search teams being prepared for the South China Sea are going to the wrong place. And yet, search and rescue isn't formally activated until 5:30 a.m., 4 hours and 11 minutes after the last cockpit transmission. By then, MH370 has crossed the Malay Peninsula, flown up the Strait of Malacca past the captain's hometown of Penang, and is heading into the open Indian Ocean, where satellite coverage is minimal and radar doesn't reach. But here's what should bother all of us. Even after the Rescue Coordination Center finally activates, the search still goes east. When the sun comes up on March 8th, ships and aircraft deploy to the South China Sea, the waters between Malaysia and Vietnam, where MH370 was supposed to be heading when contact was lost. That's where the headlines focus. That's where families are told to direct their hope. Malaysia has had the military radar data showing the plane went west since 1:30 in the morning, and they sit on it. It takes until March 11th for Malaysia to publicly acknowledge that its military tracked an unidentified aircraft crossing the peninsula and heading toward the Indian Ocean. 3 full days of search operations in the wrong body of water. 3 days of fuel and money and time burned in a place the Malaysian military already knew the plane had left. And this wasn't unknown inside the region. Vietnam's Deputy Transport Minister later confirmed that Vietnamese radar operators had independently noticed MH370 turning back westward on the night of March 8th and informed Malaysian authorities the same day. Malaysia had confirmation from a second country's radar data. They still said nothing for 3 days. While the world was searching the South China Sea, something unexpected happened. The plane's satellite communication system, which had been switched off along with everything else, rebooted on its own and started sending automated handshakes to a satellite once every hour. Just a ping saying, "I'm still here." Those handshakes are the only tracking data that exists for MH370's final 6 hours, and every underwater search since 2014 has been based on them. But here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. If the satellite communication system was deliberately switched off to prevent tracking, which the timing strongly suggests, then its reboot was almost certainly unintentional. The most widely accepted explanation is that someone on the aircraft reconfigured the electrical systems, possibly to restore power to certain buses, and the satellite communication system came back online as a side effect. A mistake. If the satellite communication system had stayed off, the plane would have vanished into the Indian Ocean, and the world would have had literally zero data about where it went after military radar lost contact. By 8:19 a.m., the handshakes stop. The final signal is a partial logon request. The satellite communication system tried to reconnect but couldn't complete the sequence. Somewhere in the southern Indian Ocean, far from any coastline, MH370 hit the water. 239 people gone. And on the ground? 4 hours of lies, 3 days of misdirection, and then 12 years of silence from the government that was supposed to find them. They didn't just delay the search, they created something far worse. Because when governments go quiet, people fill the void themselves. So far, we've walked through what Malaysia did in the first hours and days after MH370 disappeared. But what we haven't talked about yet is the evidence that surfaced after the initial chaos. Evidence that Malaysia actively buried, downplayed, or excluded from its own reports. And this is where the story shifts from government incompetence to something that looks a lot more like a deliberate cover-up. Let's start with the captain's flight simulator. And if you've seen one of our previous video, MH370, What No One Knows, you already know the basics. But here's the short version. 5 weeks before MH370 disappeared, Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah used his home flight simulator to fly a route from Kuala Lumpur northwest up the Strait of Malacca, then south deep into the Indian Ocean, ending with fuel at 0 over open water. The route closely mirrors the path investigators believe MH370 actually took. The FBI recovered the deleted files from his hard drives. Malaysia sat on the findings for 2 years and then called them game-related flight simulations. What we didn't cover in our previous video is that what happened to the FBI data after Malaysia received it. And this is the part that turns a disturbing coincidence into what looks like an active cover-up. In October 2017, independent researcher Richard Godfrey, a retired aerospace engineer acknowledged by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau itself as a credible expert on MH370, revealed something that should have triggered a much bigger response than it did. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau had admitted in an email to Godfrey's research group that they possessed several additional pages of FBI simulator data that were not included in the Royal Malaysian Police report. The ATSB initially assumed this extra material was just header and footer information, administrative data, nothing relevant. That assumption turned out to be completely wrong. The missing pages contained the timestamp data for the simulation session, and those timestamps changed everything. They showed Zahari started the simulator run on February 2nd, 2014 at 3:26 p.m. local time and finished at 4:38 p.m. 2 days later, on February 4th, Zahari was rostered to captain flight MH150 from Kuala Lumpur to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The first 3 data points recovered from the simulator are consistent with MH150's departure route toward Jeddah, meaning the simulation starts as that specific flight before diverting south into the ocean. But here's what makes the suppressed pages so damaging. Without the timestamps, you can argue the simulation was random, just a pilot messing around on different days with different scenarios. With the timestamps, the link to MH150 becomes almost impossible to dismiss. The session happens on Zahari's day off, 2 days before he's scheduled to fly the exact route the simulation begins with. That's not a coincidence, that's a timeline. And there's a question buried in all of this that nobody in an official capacity has ever answered. Why did the Royal Malaysian Police exclude this data from their report? The FBI sent it. The ATSB received it. The timestamps were there. But the document that Malaysia used as the basis for publicly clearing the simulator findings, the document that let them say nothing suspicious, was missing the pages that made the findings most suspicious. Did Malaysia receive the full FBI data and choose to leave the timestamps out? Or did the FBI send the complete data only to the ATSB and not to Malaysia? Either answer raises serious questions about who was controlling the narrative and why. The ATSB, for their part, took the simulator evidence seriously. Their 2017 report stated explicitly that there were enough similarities to the flight path of MH370 for the ATSB to carefully consider the possible implications for the underwater search area. That's the Australian government, the country that spent $150 million leading the search, saying on the record that the captain's simulator data was relevant to where the plane went down. Malaysia's Safety Investigation Report called the same data not unusual and classified it as routine gaming activity. Two governments, same evidence, opposite conclusions. One of them was leading the investigation. Take a guess which one downplayed it. And then there's the part that ties all of this together. The statement that should have been front-page news for a month and somehow wasn't. In February 2020, former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott sat down for a Sky News documentary about MH370. Abbott was in office when the plane disappeared. He coordinated directly with Malaysian leadership during the crisis. He oversaw Australia's role in the largest search operation in aviation history. And on camera, 6 years after the fact, he said this: "My very clear understanding from the very top levels of the Malaysian government is that from very, very early on, they thought it was suicide by the pilot." Abbott said he was told this within a week of the plane vanishing, while Malaysia was publicly telling the world the cause was undetermined, while they were publicly saying the pilot had been cleared, while they were telling 239 families that every possibility was still on the table. Behind closed doors, at the highest levels of government, they had already made up their minds. And Malaysia's response when Abbott went public, former Prime Minister Najib Razak didn't deny it. He told the Free Malaysia Today news portal that the pilot suicide scenario was never ruled out during the investigation. But he said it would have been unfair and legally irresponsible to say so publicly because the black boxes hadn't been found. Sit with that logic for a second. We can't name the most likely explanation publicly because we haven't recovered the evidence that would confirm it, and we're also not going to push very hard to recover that evidence. The black boxes are on the ocean floor. The government that privately believes they know what happened shows no urgency to find the proof, and the silence rolls on. Now, everything we've covered so far, the military radar delay, the false Cambodia report, the simulator data, Abbott's revelation, all of this is documented fact. When you line them up, the picture that emerges isn't a government that was confused, it's a government that knew, very early on, what likely happened, and made a calculated decision to keep it quiet. The cost of that decision hasn't just been justice delayed for the families, it's been something arguably worse. 12 years of information vacuum that has been filled by theories. We're going to walk through 3 of them now, not because they deserve validation, but because each one is a direct symptom of what 12 years of silence creates. The first is the Freescale semiconductor patent theory. It's one of the most widely shared MH370 conspiracy theories online, and it goes like this. 20 Freescale semiconductor employees were on board MH370. Freescale works on defense technology. After the passengers were declared dead, a key patent supposedly transferred to the remaining patent holders, which conspiracy theorists claim was Freescale's parent companies, connected to powerful investment firms like Blackstone and the Carlyle Group. The theory concludes that the plane was taken down to consolidate control of valuable intellectual property. Let's walk through what's real and what's not. 20 Freescale employees were genuinely on board. Freescale does work in semiconductor technology with defense applications, also true. And the company does have connections to major investment firms through its corporate ownership structure. But here's where it falls apart. The specific patent cited in the theory does not list any of the 20 Freescale employees on MH370 as inventors. It's a completely different group of people. And even if they had been listed, patent law doesn't work the way the theory claims. When a patent holder dies, their share doesn't automatically transfer to the employer, it goes to their estate, like any other asset. On top of that, Freescale's stock price dropped after MH370 disappeared. If this was a corporate assassination, it was a remarkably unprofitable one. The theory, most probably, is wrong. But here's what matters for this video. It has survived for 12 years, partly because Malaysia never fully released the cargo manifest for MH370. The full contents of what was in that aircraft's hold have never been made public. When families and journalists asked, they were told the cargo was normal, but the detailed manifest stayed classified. The second theory is Diego Garcia, the idea that MH370 was flown to the US military base on the remote atoll in the central Indian Ocean. This one has more moving parts. Diego Garcia is real. It's a heavily restricted US military installation in the middle of the Indian Ocean, roughly 2,200 nautical miles from Kuala Lumpur. MH370 had enough fuel to reach it. Some fishermen in the Maldives reported seeing a low-flying aircraft matching a Boeing 777's description on the morning of March 8th. Red and blue stripes on a white fuselage, which matches the Malaysia Airlines livery. French journalist Marc Dugas investigated the theory in 2014 and later claimed he was warned off by Western intelligence sources. And the US has never released data from its sound surveillance system known as SOSUS, which is Underwater Hydrophone Network, a system designed to detect submarines that would almost certainly have picked up the impact of a large aircraft hitting the ocean. Now, the evidence against this theory is stronger. Inmarsat's satellite data, the handshake arcs we talked about earlier, shows the aircraft moving south, away from Diego Garcia during its final hours. The math doesn't support a northwestward flight to the atoll. And the operational reality of hiding a Boeing 777 at an active military base staffed by thousands of personnel with zero leaks for 12 years stretches credibility past its breaking point. But, and this is the pattern, it persists because governments haven't released the data that would end it. The SOSUS hydrophone recordings from March 2014 have never been made public. If the US released that data and it showed no impact in the southern Indian Ocean, it would raise legitimate new questions about the crash location. And then there's the theory we need to revisit. In our last video, we brought up Ashton Forbes and the teleportation videos. We didn't go deep on them, we mentioned them as one of several alternative theories. Here's how this started. In May and June of 2014, barely 2 months after MH370 disappeared, an anonymous YouTube user going by Regicide Anon uploaded 2 short clips. The first appeared to show a passenger aircraft filmed from a military drone, a grey, grainy feed with a heads-up display overlay. The second appeared to be thermal satellite imagery, a top-down infrared view of the same aircraft. In both videos, 3 glowing spherical objects appear, orbit the plane in a coordinated pattern, and then there's a sudden flash. The plane and the orbs vanish simultaneously. For 9 years, almost nobody watched these. They had a few thousand views total. Most people who stumbled across them assumed they were an obvious CGI exercise and moved on. Then, in 2023, a Netflix documentary brought MH370 back into the mainstream conversation, and these 2 old clips resurfaced on Reddit and Twitter. Within weeks, they had millions of views. And Ashton Forbes, a self-described independent researcher who'd been investigating the videos, became their most visible advocate, building a large following on X and YouTube around the claim that these clips showed authentic US military footage of MH370 being teleported using classified advanced technology. Forbes's theory, in full, goes like this. The 3 orbs are not extraterrestrial. They're man-made anti-gravity craft deployed by the US military or associated defense contractors, possibly linked to programs at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works or the Defense Intelligence Agency. The technology involves aneutronic fusion, zero-point energy extraction, and magneto-hydrodynamic propulsion, essentially creating a localized wormhole that removes the aircraft from normal spacetime. Forbes connects this to the 20 Freescale semiconductor employees on board, suggesting the operation was motivated by control over advanced microchip technology. He points to recent US government disclosures about unidentified aerial phenomena as evidence that this kind of technology exists within classified programs. That's the theory. Now let's look at what actually supports it and what doesn't. The case for authenticity was, on the surface, more detailed than most people expected. The satellite video referenced USA 229, which is a real classified National Reconnaissance Office satellite. The coordinates displayed in the footage roughly corresponded to MH370's projected position over the Andaman Sea at the time military radar lost contact. The thermal characteristics in the infrared video, the heat signatures, the contrast patterns, appeared broadly consistent with what military wide-area motion imagery systems like the Gorgon stare would produce. And people with military backgrounds pointed out that accurately faking sensor overlays, frame rates, and thermal imaging artifacts from classified systems would require very specific insider knowledge that your average VFX hobbyist wouldn't have. And then there's the physical evidence. Forbes sees it differently, and millions agree with him. They argue the debris locations don't match the official crash zone, that the drift timings don't add up, and that the theory relies on concepts like traversable wormholes and zero-point energy, ideas that exist in theoretical physics but have never been demonstrated by anyone, anywhere. Which brings us to where we are right now. Ocean Infinity launched its third deep-sea search on December 30th, 2025. But here's the thing about this search that makes it different from everything that came before. On board, AI processes data in real time, distinguishing between natural geological formations and man-made objects. If MH370 is within the zone they're scanning, this technology has a real chance of finding it. And if they do find it, if they reach the wreckage and recover the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder, those two orange boxes will answer virtually every remaining question.